Coming up with 2 preseason games left on the docket, are we already potentially having to adjust our expectations around injury concerns for the Brooklyn Nets in the upcoming season? What are some of the intangibles we're going to look for as the preseason winds down? And are there teams across the Eastern Conference landscape we may keep one eye on? Coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo.
Yes, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find at Doug Norrie on Twitter, owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I am at Adam Armbrecht on Twitter, and also covering the Giants New York style on the One Giant podcast, my boy Andy Mack. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. And Doug, we come in with already potentially having to adjust some expectations here. Said it at the top. We have 2 more preseason games to go. We knew some guys weren't going to be available. And now the latest news is, we'll talk injuries first. Joe Harris, foot, not going to participate in preseason game number 3.
Oh, baby. Not going to have the...
That's it. End the episode right there. Oh, baby.
Look, it's not the sky's falling here. Injuries happen, but, around players that the Nets desperately needed at the end of the season last year, Harris was among that group, right? Like, we knew as it got down to it, the Nets were lacking size. I get that Harris isn't like the most dynamic defender in the world. He is still a body, and he's about as good a three-point shooter as the league has right now. And they really, really needed that in the Boston series and down the stretch, and they didn't have it. And then to hear that he might not be fully recovered, I mean, it's foot soreness, so that's a little different than what the injury is. My concern always with injuries is the cascading nature, right? It's like when one thing happens, and especially for Harris, where it was an ankle and then kind of an ankle again because the first one didn't take, the first surgery didn't take, and now you have a different injury, which is the foot soreness, which could be unrelated. I do start to get a little concerned about like I said, the cascading nature of injuries, because when these guys are finely tuned machines, when one thing doesn't work right, sometimes with the amount of pounding that feet and ankles and all this other stuff take, it just can be recurring. Is this that thing? No, but the Nets really need guys like this. Like, they need floor spacers in the worst way. They have some as backup, but if it's Harris not playing and Seth Curry not playing already, the list starts to look a heck of a lot shorter.
And not only that, just to add into it, although we haven't had anything official just yet, day-to-day was Edmund Sumner, relayed by Coach Steve Nash on Tuesday that he was working through a hip strain, which, a guy coming back off an injury, obviously, for the preseason, right, just getting yourself up into basketball speed and shape, some of these things can happen. So you mentioned it. Yeah. It's not the sky is falling here. And yet, as we go into the 3rd preseason game, and now we talk about having a guy that looks like he could show you a little something, maybe you'd be excited. Hey, no Seth Curry, no Joe Harris, Sumner, chance for you to showcase that you can be that consistent contributor. He may or may not be a participant when it comes to tomorrow night. So something else to watch for there. Nothing else really of concern. Obviously, Kyrie was away from the team with the birth of another child for him, which was fine from a health standpoint. Excited for him. That was a weird way to phrase that. Elated for Kyrie Irving in his personal life. Fine in the sense we don't have to worry about any injuries regarding him. So by and large, this team is healthy. Do you now, with Joe Harris and Seth Curry being out, do you want to go silver lining on this and say, okay, we're going to get looks at some other players in a deeper way here in preseason game number 3? Or ultimately going, 2 more preseason games, we start the season on the 19th, we need these guys to be healthy and out there?
Yeah, I'm on the latter group. I don't need to the Nets have enough of, we need to see what they have, not like what they have that's going to actually play and start. We don't need to see too much more of the bench guys who frankly might become front of bench guys if there continue to be injuries. But I don't think the Nets are in the kind of mode that where some other teams are, where it's like, hey, we know what our core is. We know exactly what we're getting from it. Let's see what else we have here along the margins in order to kind of like round out the rest of our team. The Nets really aren't afforded that kind of runway. Like they don't have that right now. They need to see how it fits with the group that's never played together. They already have a group that has never played together. And so, I mean, Harris is traveling with the team, so that's good. That's a good sign that it might not be an overall issue. I guess I came in with the oh baby to start because, like I said, however people want to feel about Joe Harris, the math is pretty undefeated in the way that like he helps your team, and specifically a team with Ben Simmons, specifically a team that if they want to play Ben Simmons and Nick Claxton together, need everyone else to be able to shoot at an elite level, not just like get by. They need those other guys to shoot at elite levels. Joe Harris does shoot at an elite level. Seth Curry does shoot at an elite level. They're not there, and then basically no one else. I mean, I'm leaving Durant and Kyrie off the list here, but the other guys they have are they have other options who are good or okay, but they're not elite. Those guys that are hurt now are elite, and the Nets just need that specific guy on the team right now to be able to space the floor, and to not have him to start just is going to once again, which has now been the theme, give an incomplete view of what this team should look like as presently built. And that's just been an absolute put the tape recorder on and keep hitting repeat over and over again on it. Like that's just been the theme for this team for the couple years now.
And I think, you mentioned about the consistency in the elite level of play, because you can look through this roster or any roster and find guys that have had really nice seasons from beyond the arc, or have been able to shoot lights out on a given lineup in a given roster. But Seth Curry and Joe Harris, you can just go back and track through year by year by year by year and know that they're relied on. So that's the big difference here too. And I wonder, when we talk about coming into this now, these next two preseason games, we'll take them one at a time, obviously, but who then, who ends up plugging in there? Who gets that minute share? You talk about playing at times the two in the starting rotation when you have Ben Simmons, Kevin Durant, and Nicholas Claxton out there. Then effectively, Joe Harris is lining up as your two guard. So you can swap out and get increasingly smaller, but you mentioned also the size piece of it. The Nets don't have a lot of guys in that backcourt to go to in that regard. So again, I'm putting, pause on the full reaction piece to this, but not knowing and not just starting to get that sense of it. We already have two preseason games where we feel like, okay, some things we like, some things we know need to get worked on here. But when you're the Brooklyn Nets and you have essentially a very different looking lineup going out there now that you insert Ben Simmons, this inevitably feels like, I'll put it this way, this is going to bleed into the regular season in terms of when does this team feel like it's starting to hit its stride a little bit? We're going to have to, we're going to be talking at the beginning of November about how do we feel about this team now that we've seen a handful of games. We're not going to have anything concrete after 4 exhibition matchups.
Which we pretty much knew even in the best of times. Like even when everything was when we assumed full health from everybody, we knew it was still going to be a work in progress. It just continues to push the timeline back. Every game that there's injuries or guys can't return, it's just going to push the timeline back on what the overall look of the team is going to be. Look, they'll start Royce O'Neal almost definitely, right? They started last game. He is fine. He's good. I think that he's shooting 40% from 3 over the first couple games of the preseason. I think that's fine. The problem is it's this, what happens after. Before it was like, hey, you have Harris, you have Seth, you have Royce O'Neal, you can kind of mix and match that group together. And that's going to be a really functional, like you can have 2 of those 3 on the court maybe at times. Well, now only one of them's there. And then the list after, I mean, Mills has been terrible in the preseason. I'm still enough of a believer on regular season Patty Mills to like have it probably be fine. But there's just a drop off. There's just more of a
small guards with Patty Mills and Cam Thomas. So we're talking about these groups of guys that come next, and then it's going to be Kes Edwards because TJ Warren is injured. He's not going to be back until November. Right. So now you're saying that's the big drop off we're seeing just in terms of getting sample sizes around this. And I do want to follow up with you here in a second, specifically around how it impacts the kind of sample we'll see from Ben Simmons, Kevin Durant, and Kyrie, if they are at this moment, time of the recording. We don't know what the starting lineup will be tomorrow, but presuming that those starters might play.
Yeah, well, we'll get into that here in a second. First, going to tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks. Look, Prize Picks figured out daily fantasy. You don't need to go into these other providers and try to figure out salaries, try to make different entries. You're up against a bunch of sharks. No, over on Prize Picks, it's just you versus the player projections. You're going more or less, and that is it. You take a player, points, rebounds, assists, blocks, anything you want there. You just go above and below or whatever Prize Picks has, and that's as simple as it gets. You pick 2 to 5 players. You figure out they're going to score more or less than the Prize Pick projection, and you can go up to 10 times on your money on any entry. That's the math you like to hear. Like I said, you're not competing against other people, just you versus the projections. The list of sports they have would be just almost too long for me to even read here, but I'll hit the big ones. NBA, NFL, MLB, hockey, that's on its way back. PGA, it's all there at Prize Picks. Entries can be made in up to 60 seconds, so less than a minute, you are good to go. Safe and fast withdrawals as well. They're currently in 30 states, Canada too, the neighbors to the north. So good chance wherever you are, you're going to be on Prize Picks as well. Download the Prize Picks app, go to prizepicks.com. You sign up to play daily fantasy sports, and the first-time users are going to get 100% instant deposit match up to $100. Got to use that promo code LOCKED ON, just like our network. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. You can do the rest of the math. I don't need to go through all the numbers. Don't forget to enter promo code LOCKED ON and sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy.
Okay, so before we move into a little bit about a couple of the things that we maybe want to see out of tonight's game, and then the final preseason game even as well, do we expect potentially to see some of these guys get some rest? One thing that I think we can say maybe positively with the absence of Seth Curry and the absence of Joe Harris, it's not a one-to-one different skill sets there. But I wonder about the idea when we think about Ben Simmons and his functionality on the offensive end of the floor, if maybe we can get a different type of sample size, even if it is Patty Mills and Cam Thomas that see more minutes here, let's just say for sake of argument. Well, those are guys that are going to move off ball a little bit more. They can slash and cut towards the basket a little bit more. Their skill set is different, where maybe it ends up giving us an idea of complementary pieces that function well with Ben Simmons on the offensive end, as opposed to, like in preseason game number 2, where it seemed like once things stagnated and Ben picked up his dribble, all of a sudden, guys that might be standing in the corner waiting for a pass, that looks different if you have a lot of off-ball movement. I'm looking, I'm trying to find things here, Doug, to perk people up here ahead of preseason game number 3.
It shouldn't stagnate too much of what they're trying to run with Simmons. If they're trying to run as much motion as possible, like which we need to see a lot, obviously Kyrie will be back for this game. So that's already just like, the Kessler Edwards to Kyrie Irving upgrade is about as big a one as you can make in the entire NBA. Like, I'm not sure how much of a bigger from value over replacement or under replacement you can make from between a starting lineup where it's Kessler Edwards and then the next game that starting lineup has Kyrie Irving in it instead. That is a massive upgrade, obviously. Will make everything will make things look significantly better just doing that. So from a starting lineup standpoint, I think we should continue to probably continue to see at least some steps forward here. We talked at length about what we need to see in terms of the offense, how we need to keep these guys in motion. They need to be able to run as much off ball or just be moving toward getting into, screens, and then dribble handoffs is going to be a big thing with Simmons. If Simmons at all and Claxton can play together, I think there's still plenty to learn here, assuming, like we said, that all these guys end up playing, which I think they will. What are you saying? And
just clarifying quickly too. Like, we all know how much Joe Harris moves off ball, right? It's not like he is a stationary waiting in the corner for his opportunity, but there's a difference of what else can that player do when moving off ball, the looks that they can get going towards the basket, something maybe you get a benefit of a couple of these other players.
Yeah, for sure. It's just there's no doubt about it. It's going to be worse. I'm not trying to couch this at all. You need these guys. They desperately need these shooters. It's like the number one Simmons sort of like hack is that with him on the court is that we've seen if you have shooters around him, he's very, very deadly. And just every guy that's not that, and they already have, presumably one in the starting lineup again with Claxton, assuming they continue to go that direction. Every guy you lose just makes it look worse. So again, like there's nothing to be done. Injuries are injuries. This is just what happens in basketball. You can't predict them. They happen to everybody, over the lifetime of a thing. It's just again, I hate to lament this, but can we just get like 5 minutes where everyone's healthy and it all looks good? I don't know. Is that asking a lot? I don't think it's asking too much. I'm a good guy. Like I treat my kids, raising my kids right. I'm good to other think most people would give me like a good personality score and like I help other people whenever they need it. Like,
yeah, not showing off, not falling behind. You're right in the meaty part of the curve in terms of life people. Maybe even on the upper end. I'm gonna go.
I think I'm on
30%. Yeah.
I'm sorry, dude. I'm on the upper end. In terms of just like
top 30
people.
Top 30.
So great. Right. So at that point, is it too much to ask whoever's out there listening, higher being, to just get the 10 guys that they want to play the most minutes on the team going into a season to be able to play the most minutes in the way that it was playing? I don't think that's too much to ask. It's not going to happen. Because what I don't want to do, are you with me here? What I don't want to do is come out. I'm kind of tired at this point of being like, yeah, but just wait till we see. Just wait till if we just had it all together. It's just been too much of this. And so in a regular team, in a regular world, would I be going nuts about Joe Harris maybe missing one game with foot soreness? No, of course not. It's just that this is a culmination. I feel it's starting to wear me down at the edges about trying to picture the team.
Can barely see it. You're fading around the edges. In the spectrum, in the existence of the Brooklyn Nets, we have seen what? 3% of the ideal version of any of these rosters since Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant came to Brooklyn. Whatever that one stretch was.
It was like the Boston series of like high leverage basketball where they basically had everyone, and then obviously the wheels came completely off. But it was that series and a little
Milwaukee. But remember that James Harden was also hobbled in that series coming off of an injury himself. So even that iteration at the time with those three, like some point in the regular season there, we got the high level elite sample size of them. It was less than 20 games that we kept pointing to as saying like, but when they can do this, watch out NBA. That team doesn't exist anymore in Brooklyn. So just to your point, this is why at some point the sample size tells me that my reality is not the thing that I think could be, but the thing that I consistently see. And what we've seen consistently with this team is something around bad luck, injuries, impacts, whatever the case may be. So yes, I am about as thin as I could possibly be on that. So the goal here would hopefully be that these injuries and these precautions, specifically knowing that they said they're eyeing the regular season for Seth Curry, the dream here at a minimum is to tell me that Joe Harris and Seth Curry are about as close to 100% and capable to go to start the season together with Ben Simmons, Kevin Durant, and Kyrie Irving. You give me that and some Royce O'Neal health, and I'm going to be a content, satisfied individual, at least to start the season.
One game of it would just sustain me over like a ridiculous amount of time. If I could just
see
one
through the desert here, a drop of water, a drop of rain would be enough.
That's it. You know how long that lasts when you're desperate? Like that goes a long. We're not talking about some kind of Garden of Eden here. Yeah, you're right. Like we've been walking through the desert. There's a little puddle of muddy water over there. I'm just gonna go. I'm gonna go slurp it up, and then
get up and sprint for 20 miles through the blazing sun.
They'll wonder how we did it. All right, so I know when we come back here, we're going to do a little Eastern Conference roundup stuff that's come up during the preseason here from some other teams, because it's always good to look a little bit, do a little hodgepodge around the league to see where other teams, if they're having the same kind of conversations that we're having as Nets fans. Some of them are. So we'll do that after this.
Okay, so obviously we have this third preseason game coming up. We'll see what we get there. We'll see about the health. But you had mentioned this last episode where we were talking about kind of looking around the Eastern Conference, this little rumor in the wind that there could be a lot of teams league-wide that are going to push the dumpster button far sooner than they normally might because there's some generational prospects coming out in next year's draft. With that being the case, when we look specifically around the Eastern Conference, we can go high level here first with the contenders, the Boston Celtics, the 76ers of the world, the Milwaukee Bucks. But I do want to get to this idea of what type of doors potentially open up here for the Brooklyn Nets if they're trying to improve themselves as we look at some of these teams that are probably skating on some thin margins. But at the top there first, I know you had some things on the Celtics specifically that you want to touch on.
Oh, just that the Celtics, just in general, like I think I'm curious about like sort of what's going to happen with them this season. I mean, they're obviously under a ton of weird duress of their own sort of making with Ime Udoka. I think that's probably at this point even been like weirdly underreported for how the team is going to function. I think that that is a massive cloud that it's like hanging over the team. So I don't think that's not like really a basketball thought as much as I think that from a team perspective, maybe it's nothing, right? Maybe it's your coach and you just kind of move on because their player personnel is good. They made some, good moves in the offseason, but Robert Williams is hurt. We
If
already
that's
know.
the case, then every Nets fan has to stop talking about Steve Nash because it just doesn't matter, right? Nah, coach come, coach go. You should be having success. Go on.
I mean, sometimes you get labeled by an organization and that's good enough sometimes. And they have a good coach that's running the organization at this point. But then they lose to Noah Gallinari. I have wondered a little bit about and then plus how far they went last year. I've been wondering if they're due for maybe a little bit of a drop off of preseason expectation. I think next week too, we'll talk a little bit about, as we get into the season, we'll do some over-unders on some of these teams' wins about where we stand. And then the other one is just Cleveland. It looks like our old friend Karis LeVert's going to start at small forward. I do not get this move at all because they already have two sort of non-defenders playing guard for them in Garland and Donovan Mitchell. But it looks like Isaac Okoro is not going to start, and it's going to be Karis LeVert. This is a weird one. I'm interested to see how it works. I don't feel like it's a fit in terms of, and maybe they just feel like defensively
Mobley and Allen carry the load, and
that's it. It's like the Rudy Gobert theory. It's like, hey, we don't need any other defenders because he's good enough. And so if they have two of those guys, but that had a shelf life on it. So anyway, that was just a little. Those were just a couple little notes around teams. But the LeVert one, just because he was ex-net, and I don't get why they're doing it. I thought that was interesting. I do have some predictions about some of these teams, though, if you want to hear it, though.
Oh yeah, I'd be interested to see because the one team that maybe we'll get into this at some point here. There's some teams in the Eastern Conference, you could say the same thing out west, that in terms of pushing that button, boy, where are they? A team like the Chicago Bulls are fascinating to me because they've been around. This last season, DeRozan refines his form. When you look at that roster, there's some real opportunities here because I remember speaking with the Locked On Bulls host, who forgive me for not mentioning his name directly here, going back in the offseason, where he was saying, essentially, when you look at their team, they've got the draft capital coming up. They'll have financial flexibility coming up. They're in a decent spot. They didn't do anything outlandish in the offseason. And they're the kind of team that if it starts to look like they're kind of treading water a little bit, a guy like Vucevic is a player that could start to get out there. Another guy that's definitely going to be out there is Kobe White. Just a matter of when, not if, they look to trade him on the market. These are, I think, a couple of the narratives in the Eastern Conference that I'm interested in from a Nets perspective and just overall, because these guys are going to shuffle and it's going to shift some of that hierarchy. And there's going to be teams that were 4th, 5th seeds last season that might actually be playing for the lottery very early in the upcoming year.
Yeah, I think Chicago's in real trouble. We kind of made mention of this last podcast or 2 podcasts ago about teams that might be sellers. I'm right there with that. I think that they basically kind of were better than they really were last year. Kind of got an unbelievable season out of DeRozan. It's hard to see that sort of repeat. Mm-hmm. You saw what happened to that team when Ball and Caruso weren't around. That they just lost. Because Vooch is not a very good defender, they need point of attack defenders in the worst way. When you have DeRozan playing the 4 and Vooch playing the 5 and you have Zach LaVine out there, they desperately needed those other guys. And when they didn't, the team just was, not even marginally worse. And so the fact that Lonzo's not here to start, it's Ayo Dosunmu is going to play point guard. It looks like I'm not saying I'm going to put, maybe I'll come back with this next week about just them not even making the playoffs. I can see them just kind of blowing it up. I don't know. They're sort of weirdly in the wilderness. That's one I'm very bearish on what Chicago is this season. Just because,
and we'll come back to it. I mean, whatever. Kobe White to me is a guy that the Brooklyn Nets should be potentially eyeing in terms of bolstering their backcourt, depending on what the asking price would be. It'd be the kind of guy that could have an offensive impact for them with his 6'4" size, obviously injury concerns. But the quick question before you can give a couple of your predictions about these teams, do we need to walk back our stance on Andre Drummond after he goes 3 for 3 from beyond the arc against the Toronto Raptors in the preseason? This dude's just raining down fire from beyond the arc. It feels like he looks a little slimmer. Guy's got a level of dedication. It's all coming up in Chicago. Doesn't seem like he was ready to do that for Brooklyn.
He tried this a couple seasons ago with the Pistons, and I thought it was during the preseason too, specifically because I remember I started adjusting my thought process on his fantasy and basketball upside when it looked like he was going to do it, and then it just went away as quickly as it came. So I think I'm just going to pump the brakes on him just being the stretch 5. It would be absolutely hilarious though if this guy Brook Lopez his late career and when Nets fans have been desperate for a stretch 5, stretch 5 is the fill in the word whenever Nets fans want to. It's Fire Nash, Stretch 5. There's a couple other things that are the default buttons that everyone hits when they want to complain. It would be hilarious though if Drummond, because remember Brook Lopez did this. He was never shot a 3 in my life. Turns out I'm amazing at it, right?
Let's build him into it, and then said, "Now go to the Lakers and get out of here,
exactly.
you crazy big."
Right. So it would be the absolute cherry on the crap Sunday that the Nets have been served. if Drummond just end up, he's not gonna, by the way, but if he did end up turning into that guy that would randomly look good next to Simmons, because you had to worry that he was going to hit threes at like a 30% clip at like 3 a game or something like that. That would be, I'm not sure I would fold up the podcast, but I would have real trouble showing up on a day-to-day basis if that ended up being the thing that happened. It'd be so annoying.
Hayes over on Locked On Bulls, by the way, had a great conversation with him. Want to make sure I shout him out. What are your predictions then with a couple of these teams? Are we talking like fall from grace for anybody at the top here?
Well, it was Chicago. I thought Chicago was going to take a little bit of a dive. Like I said, I think the Celtics could run into some issues here. I think they had a lot go right, sort of like injury wise for them last season outside of Time Lord. I think like sometimes if you look at how teams sort of like ran with overall injuries, like that can, and if you just figure like their coach is gone in a haze of controversy to start the season. So I kind of already touched on those. I mean, and there are just enough other teams that you think it's going to work, but we just haven't seen it yet. Like the Hawks, adding the DeJounte Murray and Trae Young, can two, good guys on, good players on offense coexist? In theory, right? Like they gave up a lot to try to get there. So we'll see how that works. Cleveland's still the same way. Like I mentioned, LeVert. Yeah, it seems like it'll all work. There's worlds where it doesn't, right? There's just worlds where that match, that combination is not all the way there. So I guess I'm just saying this mostly to point out that it's not like the Nets are the only team with question marks here. Like that's half the good teams in the Eastern Conference that have. Middleton's hurt to start the year for the Bucks. Like there's enough. Every team is walking into this with a moderate amount of question. The Heat are, no PJ Tucker, going to start like Caleb Martin and Victor Oladipo at the 4 or something like that. I don't know. Like this is just teams that these teams, not like PJ Tucker's the biggest needle mover in the regular season, but I guess just to reiterate on this, and now this will be my final point, is that it's easy to look at the Nets and say, oh, there's so many question marks. We have all these things we're wondering about the team. How's it going to work? Like, are we feeling awesome going into the season? You can make strong to moderate question mark cases about every single one of these teams going in. It's just not all perfect, and it's just going to take some time to kind of figure it out. So that was kind of why I wanted to just run down the Eastern Conference real quick.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, because I was going to say, Middleton obviously being hurt for the Milwaukee Bucks, maybe you hate to even think about it, but opening up a little bit for the Philadelphia 76ers here to be able to start the season pretty strong and move up this hierarchy. But you mentioned it's like Cleveland and Atlanta, both those are teams 8th and 9th seeds last year. They obviously did things this offseason, but that's could be teams that are right on the rise. Some of these teams at the high end of the conference maybe taking some steps back. It's muddled enough where the Nets can maybe navigate early season difficulties as they figure things out and still be in a good spot as we progress through. I will go right smack in the middle of the road there. The 5th seed, Toronto Raptors, man. Every year they are by default, because they have good, decent size, good length. They're incredibly well coached. They're always my team where I go, would I be shocked if the Toronto Raptors figure things out? Typically, no. But as with every one of these teams, it's health considered. And at least there's enough question marks around the Eastern Conference that the Nets can say, okay, we'll see where we stand 20 games in, not feeling like, as I mentioned a couple episodes ago, we have to push the go button here for 40 straight games to eke our way back into the playoffs.
Yeah, wait till the Knicks start 4-0 or something like that. Because what they're gonna do the classic Tibbs thing where all those starters play 40 minutes a game and they keep things a little closer than they should, and they beat some of the bad teams. And then the Brunson thing kind of looks like it's gonna work a little bit if you trust the preseason stuff at all.
As a starter is all working out for them. It's great. It's great across the board.
Yeah, wait. They're kind of like built just maybe good enough for the regular season to be like kind of do what they did a couple years ago, which is, make the fans believe they're a better team than they really are. So, that'll be just annoying enough to make the podcast annoying if the Knicks start off really good and the Nets are, 1-3 to start the season.
Shout out Andy Mack on the One Giant podcast. He fell for that hook, line, and sinker a couple years ago. He was like, "Hey, baby, I remember that record. You see the standings?
A half hour of my life that I'll just never get back arguing with about that."
That's right. I forgot you were in on
it. Was so annoying because you included me in a group chat. I was like, "Don't do it. I don't want to do this." And then you did it, and then I ended up arguing the whole time. Okay, we're going to get out of here. Make sure you subscribe over on YouTube. Appreciate all the comments that have been left over there. Just hit subscribe, totally free. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, iTunes, number one ways to help the show, and totally free to do it.
Hey, an event as pivotal as this one should be amply equipped to penetrate the fog of time elapsed. Why, that's Timothy Chalamet from Hail.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets, I guess. We will be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.